Hello and welcome back to another video on Unpacked Technologies. Today we're going to be having a look at the last 13 years of the mobile phones. Let's get straight into it. We all know how quickly the technology world is changing. This is most noticeable on phones, especially mobile phones. I thought as a bit of a fun way to start this video, I'll just show this payphone I've got, which I've collected. And I was just going to say, do you remember the days like when you used to have to hunt one of these down in a public place and put a coin in and then dial the number? And sometimes it would get jammed and then you'd have to put more coins in, depending on how long the call was. And now we all just have these mobile phones at our fingertips. So you can see we've gone from this to all these handheld devices that we have in our hands. So that shows how quickly everything's changed. So with that aside, I thought we'd take a look at these two Nokias to start off. So these are two pretty similar phones, except obviously this one's a flip phone. So I'll look at this one first quickly. So this flip phone design was pretty popular back around when this phone was around. It was stylish and compact back then. And it's interesting because we've actually seen flip phones make a comeback, with Samsung making their Galaxy Fold and Galaxy Z Flips recently with the foldable glass. So, you know, this had pretty basic functions. It could call and text, could take pretty simple videos, and it could do like voice recorders and radios. But other than that, it couldn't really do much else. This one's been dropped in water, so that's why it's showing a bit weird on the screen. This one can do all these functions. It was a bit newer, so it does have the ability to play games, certain simple games such as, you know, simple car game and Snake, which was very popular back then. Which was probably the first couple of games we actually saw on phones. So yeah, and this one has the little screen on the front, which was handy to see your notifications. Alright, let's move on to these two phones. Now these, at the time, were pretty cutting edge in my family. These were the first touchscreen phones that we had. So looking at the LG very quickly, it felt pretty new at the time. Although when you compare it to this Nokia, it's obviously the Nokia feels a lot better to hold and, you know, it's a lot more stylish. But other than that, you know, they didn't run Android. They ran their own software. But, you know, like this brought the touchscreen device other than Apple. So these were, when Apple released their first iPhone in 2007, these were probably the first few other brands that brought it out a couple of years later. And then after this, we saw more stylish devices. HTC tried to make stylish devices, and at first this felt like a very good device. You know, it didn't have a removable back like most phones of this era did. Had the ejectable SIM card slot, which is now what pretty much every smartphone has. And it ran Android. But the issue with this phone was it had after 6 to 12 months of using this, it had noticeable errors, like the screen would freeze, sometimes it wouldn't charge. Usually you would have to have it on plugged in most of the time for it to work properly. So we did have quite a few issues with this device. But other than that, you could tell it was quite stylish for the time. And then we move on to these two Samsung phones. Now this is where we start to see the dominance of Apple and Samsung take over from, you know, things like Nokia and Motorola, which were very popular back in the time of keypad phones and things like that. So this is the S3. I'll boot it up for you while I talk about it. This has obviously similar design to the HTC, although it's not as premium as you can see. It's got a plastic back which is removable. But this was quite cutting edge at the time because it had micro SD, which most phones didn't have. Mostly, which helped with storage. And also the benefits of this was it was very reliable. It ran Android, which was very cutting edge back then. So we never had any errors with this phone, and quite similar. This is quite similar to the S4. You know, we didn't have any problems with it. So it's got the same removable back and pretty much the same features. It did have it ran probably a slightly newer version of Android, but it wasn't really noticeable. But we just had we had a better design. You know, we had a more structured design than this. So around the same time as the Galaxy S4, we had the iPhone 5C, which was released in 2013. And if you compare these two phones, Samsung was winning out on the screen real estate. They had a much bigger screen, although Apple had noticeably better performance. Even though it's stuck on iOS 10, it's still okay to use today, whereas this is pretty outdated on Android. Other than that, there's not much to talk about with this iPhone. Obviously, Apple had their own chips in it, so they've gotten faster over time. And this phone was aimed for cheap, as a more of a budget iPhone. Has a plastic back, and you know, but it was still good. It was still good at the time, and still probably pretty expensive because it was Apple. And then lastly, we've got the Samsung Galaxy S7. Now, this one is where you start to see really premium designs come to phones. This is starting from the S6. Samsung started to go, well, this plastic design with the removable back that we have at the moment isn't going to cut it. So they started going from the S6 and onwards. They had glass backs, which was much better and made them compete more with some of the other brands like Apple. So I hope this video has been helpful in giving you a bit of a snapshot of the last 13 or so years in mobile phones. It's amazing to see how quickly everything has changed and how quickly it is changing at the moment. So yeah, thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to my channel to stay tuned for more content. And I'll see you all in the next video.